All right, great. So thank you all for coming out here. We've got a good turnout. I'm so excited to be here in Serbia talking about enterprises and lean UX. This is like a great curation of different talks. And I think that, Ryan, you set me up pretty well there, man, giving us a good intro. And we'll see, I think that there is a lot of overlap in how we do things at HubSpot and how GoDaddy does things as well. And it's probably because these types of approaches to design work. My talk is going to be a little bit longer than we originally discussed. So this is about a 50-minute talk. So hang tight with me. I hope that we get some good learnings out of this. And then after that, we're going to have a panel where you can ask some questions and stuff like that. So as was mentioned, my name is Austin Knight. I'm a senior UX designer at HubSpot. Show of hands, how many of you all have heard of HubSpot before? Maybe you've used our products. Okay, cool. So most of us, but just for those of us that aren't aware of HubSpot, we are a software as a service company based out of Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. And we produce all-in-one marketing and sales software that businesses can use to grow all of their marketing and all of their sales in one place in-house. And it's free. We also have a free CRM that a lot of people like to get started with. So there's some cool stuff happening there. In a couple weeks here, we have our annual event called Inbound, where we're going to be launching a bunch of new stuff as well. So it's really it's an exciting time to be at the company. As a senior UX designer, I oversee a few different things, but what I'm most known for is managing the user experience design for hubspot.com and all of our primary web properties. These are some pretty high impact websites. They receive upwards of 10 million hits per month. And we're dealing with clients, customers in over 90 countries around the globe. So we've got a really diverse and large data set that we're working with. So we've established some very specific and precise processes around how we have organized ourselves internally and then how we set our approach to design based off of this. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. Before I do that, however, I want to address the elephant in the room. And that's these two concepts. These don't really go together very often. This almost sounds like a bullshit title, doesn't it? And that's because these two things, in a lot of ways, they're kind of worlds and galaxies apart, with so many other things in between them, separating them from each other. Lean is a very fast-moving, iterative approach that you would associate with startups and people that want to fail fast and learn, whereas enterprises are way more slow-moving. They don't want to necessarily fail at all. Sometimes they're known for burying their heads in the sand and just saying, let's keep doing things the way that we've always done them. So we don't usually associate these two things as being closely together. This is more of like an agile approach. That's more of a waterfall approach. However, we have at HubSpot found ways to remove some of these barriers and start to bring them a little bit more closer together and form something that I actually like to call a lean enterprise. That's the type of design team that we have structured at HubSpot. So that's what I'm going to discuss here, and I'm going to break this out into two different sections. The first of which is going to cover our unique approach to lean UX, so some of like the high-level philosophical process stuff, like how do we approach design and how did we arrive at that. And then the second section is going to take you through an actual case study of a redesign that we did on hubspot.com. So you'll get a look at how that sort of abstract process is applied in a real project and how that actually works. And this is kind of cool because you often don't get to get this kind of a look at an enterprise project. Companies are usually a little bit more secretive about this, but we're going to dive into some details. So I'm going to start with our approach to lean UX. When I joined the company, the team that was working on hubspot.com sort of looked like this. We were siloed. So research was happening over here in like its own team where people were collecting quantitative and qualitative data. They were focusing on conversion and stuff like that. And then design sort of happened in its own team where they were mostly realistically focused on visuals and the interface side of things, not so much the functionality or performance. And then the engineers were off on their own little team, and they basically just had to wait at the end of the funnel and create all the shit that everybody else told them to create. So this naturally lent itself to a sort of waterfall process where one team would get a bunch of data and then they'd say, hey, based off of that, here you go, design something. And then the design team would say, okay, here, engineer, create that, And that was really awkward for us because the whole rest of the company was actually operating with an agile methodology. So this was the only team that had happily taken a siloed and waterfall approach. So they wanted to fix this. And what they did as a first step in that direction was introducing user experience as a layer on top of all of this. And the way that they did that was by hiring me as the first UX designer on this team. And when I joined, I realized, okay, so these three things are all kind of separate right now, but there's a natural transition that we could make here to bring them all together into one single team. And this was an easy thing to do because if you look at all three of those areas, they're really just the three core competencies that you would look for in a UX organization or in a UX designer. You would expect a UX designer to have a core research competency, be able to design, and then also at least be able to understand code, communicate on an equal basis with developers, if not create some stuff on their own. And to Ryan's point, this became the glue, this user experience layer became the glue that held all of these different teams together and brought them together into one single team. When we did this, we saw that people started working together. We weren't just passing shit off to each other. We were collaborating from the very start. And deliverables from different teams were happening at the same time. So research was happening at the same time as design, and then the developers would start coding up some early structures before the designs were even near completion, and this was much more effective. It was true collaboration. We had kind of landed on a little bit of a rough, lean process. It's just a natural conclusion by bringing these teams together and recognizing that UX was the core thing that we were doing. And so with this sort of natural process that we came to, we said, okay, this is actually working pretty well. We feel like we're going in the right direction here. But we hadn't formalized anything, so it was time to start putting some pen to paper and say, what does this process actually look like? What does this mean for our team? So we created a process that looks like this. I basically began by not imposing anything on the team and just talking with them, working with them, observing how they worked, and then making those quick little transitions. And then together, we created this process. So this is our version of a lean UX process. It's really simple and straightforward, but there's a few important things to remember about it. The first of which is that it's iterative and cyclical, so this does not happen linearly, or it's very difficult to sort of place it on a timeline, though we will try to do that later on. But it's something that's always happening over and over and over again in cycles. And then the other important thing is that it's fluid and adaptive. So you can theoretically start and end at any point of this cyclical process, and then you're also going to find that sometimes things will be added, other times things will be omitted. It really adapts itself to the project at hand. If we were to compare lean on a timeline with other common processes, we'd find that in waterfall, we're commonly going to be building for a long period of time. Maybe that's 3, 6, 8, 12 months. In some absolutely terrible cases. And then after we've built everything and we've been seeking perfection this entire time, we're going to release it and then we're going to forget about it. That's the end of it. We've already moved on to another project. We're probably getting some feedback, some emails and stuff like that, but we didn't budget any time to implement that into the design going forward. In Agile, we seek to shorten those build cycles and say, okay, we're gonna do like a 2-week sprint or something like that, build something really quick, but we only release it internally. We want to keep doing those quick little build cycles until we get to a stable build, and then we release it externally, and only then do we get feedback. Some teams do build in an opportunity to capitalize upon that feedback, other teams don't. It really depends on how they've structured themselves. In Lean, we say we're gonna get real data and feedback as quick and early as possible. So as soon as we have something that's reasonably ready to be released, we release it, and usually that's going to be after like a 2-week sprint cycle in a normal project, and other more heavy ones it could take a little bit longer. But we're going to say, okay, we want to get real data, real feedback as quick and early as possible so that we can get outside of our own stupid walls, our own heads, deliberating internally based off of opinions or assumptions, and say we're going to get live data and use that information to drive the decisions in the design. We're going to let the people that are actually using our product and hopefully paying for our product tell us what's working and what's not working. That first little cycle there, this one up front, you'll commonly hear this referred to as an MVP MVP, minimum viable product, a cool little buzzword, but it does have some weight to it, and what it basically says is what is the minimum amount of building and design and whatever that you have to do in order to have a viable product that is ready enough to release and actually get data that you can trust. And the key word there is viability. That's where a lot of people misinterpret what the MVP means. It doesn't mean create something that's a total piece of shit and release it anyway because we want to work quickly. What it does mean is what is the minimum amount that we have to build to where we can confidently get some good data. And as soon as we're at that point where we're like, yep, we can get real statistically significant data as a result of this, we're releasing it. We're not afraid. If we look at what those lean UX cycles look like on this timeline, we can see think, make, check happening over and over and over again within those build, release, and feedback points. So this is something that's constantly happening in a cyclical fashion over and over and over again on this timeline. If we break this out into the deliverables that this process can yield, we'll see, oh my god, there's a ton of shit that this can do. But there's also a few important things to remember about this. It does yield a lot of deliverables in some cases, but I've literally never been on a project where we did anywhere near all of these things. And this goes back to the fluid and adaptable nature of this process. It says, okay, based off of the unique project that you have at hand within your company, your unique audience and all of that stuff, what do you need to do at this phase versus that one? So you'll see some things only pop up like once or twice because they're really appropriate at the beginning or at the end, for example. Other things are popping up at multiple points. You may say, let's do some base user testing at the very front of the project to see how we want to generally structure the design. And then after you launch it, you say, we're going to do some more user testing to see how it performed. That's like fairly easy to understand, right? But what I love about this process is two things with these deliverables specifically. First, they really place a lot of onus on the designers. So the designer is the one that's responsible for looking at the project and scenario at hand and saying, okay, based off of the questions that we need to answer, the goals that we have, I think that these are the things that we need to do. This is how we're going to find solutions to our problems. And then the second important thing is that I'm blanking. These deliverables, they're always focusing on getting the objective information at any point in the process, right? So they're not. This is not like we're throwing up deliverables here that are saying we're going to talk amongst ourselves. It's keeping the designer honest and accountable for the stuff that they're creating. So if we were to break this out into actual deliverables that we could create, in the think phase, we could create some scenarios like how is somebody going to actually move through this process. In the make phase, we could create some wireframes, like what's the general structure of the design. Maybe we move into some mockups, and then finally in the check phase, maybe we're running some heat maps or some scroll maps to see how users are interacting with the design after we've launched it. In the same way that I believe in very simple and straightforward processes, I also believe in simple and straightforward tools. So we use very simple and straightforward tools. And all of our research and content is contained within Google Apps. So all of the qualitative data that we've collected, all of the copywriting that we've done, everything is contained within folders that we've sort of put together for each project that we have. You can go there as sort of like the single source of truth for all of that stuff. We know that's all of the content and research related stuff is going to be in one single place. And then we do the same thing with design assets. So everything is contained within InVision. So all of the designs, all of the assets, if developers want to export them, though recently we've moved to more of a code-based design system, so they don't even need to do that. And then also the feedback itself is all contained within InVision. So if somebody sends you some feedback on Slack, it's like, please put it on the actual design in InVision. And this is nice because you can communicate in the context of the design. It's much easier for people to view and understand and imagine how that's actually going to work. But it also becomes a little bit of a checklist for the designer. They can go back and say, okay, I'm going to resolve this one. This is something we need to do or whatever. And then we've got some ongoing chats happening in Slack. So my team is mostly remote, but we also have a bunch of global offices all around the place, all around the world. So in order to sort of keep track of all of these moving parts that are happening in the project, we leverage Slack for ongoing chats. We're going to leverage Zoom and Loom two different products that sort of do the same thing but have rhyming names, weirdly enough. Zoom is leveraged for like video conferencing and stuff like that, like if you want to hop on a call with somebody and do that in real time, or if you have meetings that you need to do remotely. We have a Zoom link for every single meeting at our company. And then Loom is more of a thing where, like, say that you're writing a long Slack message or an email and you're like, actually this could be better communicated if I just talk to this person directly. You can record like a quick 5-10 minute video that you could send to your team, or in some cases to the entire company. Then we report all of our results in a company intranet that is run through Atlason's product called Confluence. So this is, we refer to this as a wiki. It's almost like an internal version of Wikipedia. And whenever we have a project that launches or some type of big initiative in the company, we create a wiki post specifically about that project. This is powerful because it keeps us honest to the entire company. So we are reporting on the results that we're getting, and hopefully all 1,600 people across our different offices and everything will be able to know what's happening at any given time by checking the wiki. But also it allows us to keep a system of records. So we can go back and see, 2 years ago when we did a similar project, what were some of the things that we tried that didn't work out, and what did we learn from them? Let's not repeat our mistakes, those types of things. But also, when you're growing your team at a ridiculous rate, like we are, when I started at the company, we were like 300-400 people. That was 3 years ago. Now we're 1,600, as I mentioned. That type of growth is really crazy to support when you're also, like you're trying to onboard people, plus you're also trying to do your job. So the wiki comes in really handy there. You can just say, okay, these are the 10 most influential projects that we did in the last year. Here's our whole rundown of the process and everything like that. We've got like this whole onboarding doc, 100-day plan thing that we can give to people, and we don't have to sit there and like individually explain that stuff over and over and over again. So I really believe in keeping a system of record for all of the projects that you launch and the big initiatives that you have. And then finally, because again, there's so many moving parts, we're going to have regular stand-ups and reviews. That's fairly easy to wrap your mind around. All of this stuff up here is then cataloged within Jira, which is another Atlason product, has some nice integrations with some of the tools that are above it. So if an important piece of research comes in and we've put that into our Google folder, it's also going to go into the Jira ticket related to that project. If we have a design change, that's going to be logged in the Jira ticket. An important conversation on Slack is going to be logged in the Jira ticket. So if you want to understand what is happening with an entire project, all you got to do is go to its unique Jira ticket or Epic or whatever, depending on the scale of project that you're looking at. So we create a Jira ticket for each project, and then we break it out by tasks, like this is what each team is going to do, these are the specific things they're doing, put that on a Kanban board, and it's really easy to understand where everybody is at in the process, what kind of progress they're making, and what's coming next. What this really empowers us to do is to rapidly and regularly release thoughtful solutions that are supported by user and business data. So those aren't just random words that I've thrown up there. There's actually reasons behind all of them. We are moving quick and often, and we're doing this with a lot of thought. We're not just like randomly putting things up there. We've got quantitative and qualitative data to back this stuff up, and the reason that we're doing that is because we want to serve our users and we want to serve our business, not ourselves. So how does this work in an actual project, right? This is a big process. This is a crazy thing to introduce to a company. When we brought it to HubSpot, it didn't just change the way that we designed, it actually changed our culture. So how would you actually do something like this in a real project? I want to walk you all through a case study, as I mentioned earlier, of a redesign that we ran on hubspot.com. And this is really less of a redesign and more of a major iteration. I'll kind of go into detail about why I actually say that. Or you could say, in other terms, it's actually a refactoring. So if you're familiar with like technical debt, that's really more of what this was. And the reason that I say that is because the word redesign kind of implies that you're going to throw out a lot of the stuff that you previously had and then work for a while on something almost entirely new and then launch it and forget about it. And we literally never do that. Our process doesn't lend itself to that, and we don't believe that that's a good approach to design. We're always going to be using the previous knowledge and structures and everything like that, patterns, whatever, and integrating that into the next major iteration of the design. So we don't ever throw any stuff out, and we also don't quit working on it. These designs are living, they're alive, the web is digital and constantly changing, and the process recognizes that. So if we were to look at those, remember that timeline that I showed earlier? Let's say that we break those out into quarters, like quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're looking at an entire year of how we design for hubspot.com. Now we're going to start out with some quick little iterations. We're running an experiment here, releasing a product feature there. Little things, okay, we found out this converts better, and then we're going to bring that all together in one huge iteration, which could take up to an entire quarter to produce, and then we're going to continue running additional smaller iterations and experiments after that. The reason that we do this is because while we're learning a bunch of things in different parts of the site, we're launching some different stuff, we ultimately have to sort of bring it all together and consolidate it so that the design remains consistent. And that ended up playing into a lot of the goals that we had for hubspot.com when we were designing it. When we started, this is what it looked like. So this was the base site that we were dealing with, and it was a pretty complicated piece. So we had to do a lot of evaluation up front. We're dealing with over 10, as I mentioned earlier, over 10 million visitors per month. That converts into over 60,000 leads per month, so a lot of different leads coming in from different areas of the business. This then converts into over $270 million in revenue per year, so the site is not just something that's talking about our products or helping our customers or anything like that. It's the lifeblood of the business, and it's earning real revenue. And it also serves over 30,000 customers. So I mentioned how we've got customers in over 90 countries around the globe. Not only are we dealing with people that are coming to the site to evaluate the software and hopefully convert and all of that stuff, but we're actually serving our customers, teaching them about the product or even helping them log into it when they've lost their login link and stuff like that. And because we're dealing with all these different countries, we've got a lot of different cultural and language implications and some crazy stuff that goes in there. And lost the slide back there. This always happens. So one additional metric that we can look at there, okay, this thing's going to run itself. An additional metric is that all sort of nets out to over 2,000 pages that are logged in Google. So it's a huge site. We're dealing with a gigantic property. And that can get really difficult when you're trying to do something like this. We're like, okay, what is going to be the area that we focus on, like of all of this data that we have, all these different pages that we're dealing with, how do we know where to even start? So that was a big part of this process. 90 countries, there were supposed to be 2,000 pages after that, but there weren't. So in order to keep ourselves focused, we knew that we had to create very specific goals, right? Like if we didn't have goals, if we didn't know what we were going to be focusing on specific parts of the site, it would be very easy to get distracted with the other thousands of pages that we could be looking at. So we set 4 core goals for the redesign of HubSpot.com. The first of which was going to be focused on user experience, or like the underpinnings of the design. And the way that we were thinking about this is that when we first created the design that you were looking at, it was sort of like an all one and done job, right? So we created the site, that original design, all within the context of itself. So like you're creating a hero section, and at the same time you're also creating the blog content that's under it. So it's all very intentional, and everything was all designed at once. However, after we launched that, of course, we wanted to improve our design and break away from the one single collective design that we had and see if we could run some experiments and get it to perform better. So naturally, we started running some tests on the design, and we found, okay, this one performs well, so we're going to keep that element there. And then maybe, we run another test, and we find, okay, actually this one failed, so we're going to get rid of that, because that happens from time to time. But we could probably still do something with this section, so we ran another test, and this time it succeeded. Well, you repeat this process over and over and over again throughout time until eventually you realize, okay, wow, I've got a site that's actually performing really, really well, but it's a collection of a bunch of different elements that we created at different points in time. This can lead to a huge dilemma for designers, something that I like to call design debt. So as I mentioned with tech debt earlier, you've got like the system of a bunch of different code and stuff like that that's sort of thrown together over time, and then it starts to fall apart. Same thing happens in design. As you start to run experiments and iterate with those like small iterations that I was talking about earlier, you get a bunch of different elements, some that were created 6 months before another one, and they don't always feel like they were intentionally put together. And so as the designer, you're like, this is tough because we've got a site that's performing extremely well quantitatively. Like when our site looked like this, it was converting at a ridiculous rate. So it's like, oh, well, the design's doing pretty well. There must not be anything wrong with it. But at the same time, if I sort of like put my design eye on it and I try to go through the experience or I run a user test or whatever, it's like, man, this thing works really well, but it looks like shit. Like it's a very bad experience. So it's tough because it's like, how am I going to state the case that we need to rethink the site that's already performing extremely well as this collection of experiments? So we knew, luckily enough, that we had come up against a bunch of design debt through the qualitative research that we ran, and that was something that we wanted to fix here. We wanted to bring this design all back together within the context of itself, so where these elements all started to feel intentional and like they were all part of the same experience. Next, we wanted to focus on the creative direction. So one part of the site may have looked like this, while at the same time another part of the site may have looked like this. We had some crazy stuff happening because in the same way that GoDaddy had, any enterprise had a bunch of teams that were tasked with working on different parts of the site, we had the same thing, and we also didn't have a totally global creative direction because we hadn't completely figured out what the best one was. So some teams would go in a completely different direction than other teams, and then as the user, you could be on hubspot.com and receive two completely different experiences on the same domain. So people were thinking that they were accidentally leaving hubspot.com, which was weird because they would look at their URL bar and it was still the same domain, so they didn't know what they did wrong. So we wanted to fix that and figure out objectively what is the best creative direction that we can take. And then we also wanted to focus on conversion, the stuff that was going to drive the quantitative results that I mentioned earlier for the site. And then finally, this is a tough thing that a lot of enterprises have to deal with, is that you have a regular product launch cycle, and usually once a year there's like some big product launches that happen, and we were dealing with that. So we had some very concrete product launches that were coming up, and they were not accommodated by the site. So we had to not only communicate these product launches, but we had to do it by a hard deadline. Inbound 2016 was happening in November. So we needed to get this stuff done within roughly a 3-month period. So from the very start, from when I was in Dublin with my boss and we were talking about the next experiments that we wanted to run, and we were like sitting there and we were like, you know what, I think we just need to tear this whole fucking thing down. From that very first conversation all the way to when we launched it on stage, we had roughly 3 months to redesign this thing. So what we saw is that naturally a lot of stuff was happening all at once, overlapping on top of each other. And we couldn't do this stuff blind, so we needed to develop very specific, even more specified goals than the ones that we had already created. And we chose we're going to focus on 2 categories, the first of which is going to be design. I'll move out of the way for the picture. And the second of which, keep taking pictures, it's totally cool. And the second of which is going to be conversion. And then conversion rates and revenue and retention and stuff like that. And these weren't just like fluffy metrics like, oh, we want to improve the design or whatever. We were tracking real metrics against each one of these goals. So in qualitatively, with the design, we were looking at like system usability score and stuff like that, tracking stuff with Usability Hub, Validately, running qualitative tests. And then on the quantitative conversion side, we were tracking over 90 different unique conversion flows throughout the site. So we had said, okay, these are the conversion flows that we have. Here is how each one is performing. Here is how much opportunity we think we have for each one. This is what we think the end conversion rate will be after this project. And those are the metrics that we were going to hold ourselves to. So that still wasn't enough, though, to begin the project. We still needed to justify this entire movement and investment for the company. We couldn't just put a bunch of people and resources and stuff like that without knowing that it was something that we were going to get a return on. It could have been very easy to just update the site with some of the product stuff and leave it the way that it was. So we began with an MVP test that looked like this. This is the actual design that we put together. I basically just got together myself as the designer with one other person in the company, Matthew Barbie, and we said, okay, let's come up with a quick little test to see if this is something that we want to invest in. So we began by taking our style guide And looking at it, this is an amazing document that we've got that was put together by our design and development teams over the course of a couple of years, and we said, oh man, that thing's so great, let's light that shit on fire. And not pay attention to any of that. And we didn't. So we said, let's throw everything out the window, and we began with some guerrilla research. Researching with methods that we had never tried before, or perhaps we weren't allowed to try before, getting a little bit out of our comfort zone to figure out what are some of the opportunities that we could identify in this. That led us to then completely change our messaging and tone of voice. The brand was going to be speaking in a way that it hadn't spoken before, that we weren't allowed to speak in before. We broke all of our written style guidelines. And then we said, okay, along with that, let's try some weird aesthetic elements. So we introduced illustrations because that's a really popular thing to do. I threw some drop shadows on stuff. I later realized that they were ugly as all hell, but they're there in this design in all of their glory. And then we tested some different colors and animations that we hadn't done before. So we broke our color palette and said, let's move stuff across the screen, which we hadn't been doing very much of. And then finally, we took a completely different conversion approach. So we not only were communicating the conversion to the user in a completely different way, convincing them to use the product in a different way, but the flow that they went through was also different. So that experience was radically simplified in a way that we felt we hadn't been able to do before. And then with all of this, we said, let's go ahead and launch this without telling anybody. So we did a silent launch, and it was an experiment that just Matt and I knew about. We launched it. And quickly we got some data back, and we realized, oh, it converted at 20% better than the control. So everything that we had created with within the guidelines and rules, the control of this page, which was like a HubSpot sales conversion landing page. This ridiculous design that we had come up with in a couple days and launched without telling anybody was converting at a rate that was 20% better than the control. So we knew there was some real opportunity there, and we also tested it qualitatively with users, did some user testing, and we realized people liked it as well. They liked this aesthetic direction better. So we were onto something here. So basically, what I'm saying here is that if you want to do good UX, there's like 5 core steps that you take. First, you want to burn your style guide. Second, do whatever you want. And then don't tell your team about it. Launch it without telling anybody. Hey, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but you can still brag about it at a conference. No. I'm kidding. There was actually a bunch of stuff in the design that didn't work at all. Like we really realized, okay, there's some stuff that worked here, but there's a lot of stuff that failed. And it turns out that there is a reason why 2 rogue individuals don't generally run the design direction for an entire company. And that's exactly what we were doing there. But the important thing is that we actually learned a lot from this. There was a lot that we could use to go forward with. And if I'm being completely honest here, we actually knew that it was going to perform pretty well. We did some pre-launch testing, so we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to completely ruin our brand in the process, or that we weren't investing our time in a really poor area. So what you're looking at here is a pre-launch heat map done using a PNG. So this is just like, I just exported the design from Sketch and then ran a heat map with some users to see how they would interact with the design and get a rough conversion rate based off of it. And then here you're looking at a post-launch heat map done using the actual live real design that was built with real code and that you could find on the web. You'll just notice that the interactions, the click patterns and interactions and everything are almost identical. So we were able to predict quantitatively how this was going to perform, but we also predicted it qualitatively. We ran user tests before we launched anything, and we figured out, okay, this is something that people are probably going to be pretty cool with. So this is just a quick little quote that we got throughout that process. Once we had our project justified, we knew that there was real opportunity and it was something that we wanted to invest in. We began by forming what I like to call a SWAT team. So this, just now we're getting to the kickoff of the project. Everything else was just sort of done before. And our first step was forming a SWAT team, because when you're dealing with an enterprise that has 1,600 people, it's like there's a total tendency for just hundreds of people to want to get involved on any project. But if you're dealing with a project like our site, which, as I mentioned earlier, is like the lifeblood of our business, it's crazy how many stakeholders you're going to impact. So we knew that we had to keep that super, super small. So we started with 3 executive stakeholders. These were the 3 people that were going to be making all of the final calls on the design throughout the whole project. So we had one person that was representing the brand, one person representing marketing, and then another person that was representing growth. The person that represented marketing and the person that represented growth, they're sort of like cross product and marketing in their functions. So they were looking at this from a pretty holistic perspective, and we only had to answer to 3 people as a result. And then we had around 12 individual contributors that we brought in. So like you've got one UX designer right there in yellow, that's me, a couple visual designers, some copywriters, CRO. Each one of these people, unless there was more than one of them, we would assign a DRI for each part of the project. So DRI means directly responsible individual. And what that means is that they would be responsible entirely for their section of the design or the site or the experience, whatever you want to call it. So they would make all of the calls, they would create all of the stuff, and then they would be held responsible for that in the end. So there was like one single person that you could go to if you wanted to talk about visual design, or one single person if you wanted to talk about copy. And that made us much more efficient and effective. People knew who they needed to be talking to. And then another cool thing about this is that so that's 12 individual contributors in total, but we were also based all around the globe. So you had a bunch of people in our US offices, some people working remote in California, a bunch of people in our Dublin office. I work remote and live in Brazil, so I was down there. We had some people in Canada, New Zealand. So there was some cool like around the globe collaboration, and this really caused us to lean into that process a lot more, where we've got like that constant communication. Everybody knows what's happening at once. And what I love about this is that you look like, so I was the DRI for UX, and then the guy I was corresponding with, who was the DRI for visual design, he was in Dublin, and then you've got like the copywriter DRI in the United States. So it was really like cross time zone, cross collaboration. After this project, anybody that tells me that design cannot be done remotely, I call full bullshit, because it worked completely well for us. It was an excellent experience. And even though that number of 12 people, like to you all sitting in this room, maybe some of you are from startups, you're like, man, I wish I could have 12 people on my effing design team. Oh my God, that's a ton of people. I'm dealing with like one person as the designer. If you look at it, out of the 1,600 people that we have at HubSpot, 12 people is actually pretty small. That's about 1% of the company, less than 1% of the company that would be determining the design direction for the site. So in the same way that it's really important to keep teams small in enterprises, I would say that it's actually also really important to do this at any company. I've been in startups before. Even if you're just dealing with a 12 or 15 person company, there can be a total tendency to get everybody involved, but you want to figure out like what is the minimum amount, the smallest amount of people that we can have on this project to represent everything and also not bloat our stakeholders. I think that that's a noble thing to pursue in any design project. So this helped us out a lot. We had like other redesign projects where we had completely bloated and failed to launch a bunch of stuff. So in the think phase, we started with research, looking at our conversion flows. This is what our conversion flow used to look like. What you'll notice here is that, okay, so this is like the start of the interaction, and then somebody wants to look at marketing, and then they want to go to maybe a product tour, and then they want to learn about a demo or something like that, and then finally they convert. So each one of these is its own conversion path. There were a lot of different conversion paths, a lot of different ways to convert on our product. And I don't mean like those 90 different like general paths and flows that I was talking about. I mean, these were distinctly different conversion flows. And so that was a problem, because we noticed that the simple conversion flows, the ones where it's like 1, 2, 3, were converting at a rate that was much higher than their more complex counterparts. So we needed to fix that, and so we began by simplifying our conversion flows and creating something that we now refer to as our Get Started flow. 3 steps to convert on any product. No matter where you go in the site, your experience may be a little bit different, but it's always going to be 3 steps to convert on a product. You can see that now live at hubspot.com/product/get-started. Then we started looking at user journeys. What does this look like for an individual user when they go through our site? And we found in some cases, this guy Raymond, he had signed up for multiple different products, but he never logged into them. So that was really weird. Like, why is he signing up for marketing and sales and then he's not logging into them? And then this guy, Hassan over here, he signed up for the same product twice, but he never logged in. Some weird behaviors that we were seeing here. All of this data was pulled from HubSpot Analytics. So that's something that we love about our product, is that it's not just like data and numbers. We're looking at individuals. And we've got like their social media accounts, pictures of them and everything like that. We can call them up and talk to them. Every single person that goes to our site, we're looking at them on an individual basis. So we're able to get stuff like this where we can see what Hassan's experience was like over the course of several months of interacting with us. And as we did that, and then we decided to call up Hassan and talk to Raymond as well, we found that they thought that our product sign-up forms were our login forms. So that's why they were signing up for multiple different products or the same product twice. And that's kind of like a weird insight as a designer, where it's like, oh, okay, I didn't create the proper affordances in that design to make it clear that this isn't a sign-up form, or that this isn't a login form, it's a sign-up form. And then the path to getting to those forms was really weird as well. So we were able to identify some stuff in our user journeys, and then start digging deeper and collecting some more feedback through some interviews, getting some really good quotes that we could pull out and give to people. And then when we had groups of users that we felt the interviews were particularly insightful, or perhaps they fit a specific user group that we really wanted to pry into, we've got like a bunch of flags in our product that will let us know when somebody's going to churn, or if they're a very happy user, or if they're having a support issue or something like that. We decided, okay, let's send out some surveys to some of these people and see how they want to learn about software, how they learned about our product. A lot of the questions that were being mentioned earlier, we started asking people in a survey format. Figured out, okay, in our case, people mostly like to watch a video to learn about our software. So that was an interesting thing, especially with like a design team that was mostly anti-video in the past. Getting to know that type of data helped to arm us for what we were going to include in our designs. And then through this research, we were able to boil all of that down to 39 core pages that we would be focusing on. So you remember that 2,000 number from before? We boiled it down to 39 here. And when we did our original assessment, we were thinking it was going to be about 70. So this was nice because we were able to identify a bunch of pages that actually didn't matter to the results that we wanted to get, or to the core experience we wanted to deliver, and say, let's focus just on 39 based off of the research that we did here. And then we decided, okay, let's move into our the next most important part of the project, and this is where things really start to get moving, and that's content and copy. So our copywriters were starting work, and the first thing that they did also was research. This sounds a little bit redundant, but the research didn't end at that like specific research phase that we had. That's really, we were just setting the context for everybody to start working throughout that lean UX cycle. So at the same time that this was getting started, we also had designers working on stuff as well that I'll go into. But the copywriters still needed to do more research to help figure out what their messaging and strategy was going to be. And this is important to us because we've really come to identify high quality research as the primary determining factor in the success of copy, which is a little unintuitive, but we believe that the best copywriters are also great researchers. So it's very easy when you're dealing with copywriters to just look at the words and say, you know, this is the value that they bring. Let's talk about different ways of saying the same thing or something like that. But all of the copywriters that I've worked with, the ones that have been most successful are the ones that are investing the majority of their time in research and justifying why they're using those specific words or why they're telling the specific story that they're trying to tell. So we had copywriters that when we would go into a copy review, they had specific sources of research that they had done cited for each message that they were trying to get across. And we saw this come out in our copy docs. So this is like this is how the copywriters would deliver copy to us. They basically just create like a rough structure in Google Docs, as I said earlier, that's all sort of contained in the same place. And so what they're telling us here is not how to set up the design, but how they want to tell the story. And then if you looked at the actual like Google Doc, you'd see highlights and for like each piece of copy, and out to the side links to the sources that I was talking about earlier. And then they would take this content and copy and start putting it into some rough wireframes. So, and because we're using a design system, we're also able to create patterns and design elements and everything like that that are really common in our wireframing software. And the copywriters could kind of go in there and just click and drag things in and say, oh, you know, this is maybe generally how I would set this up. Again, this wasn't meant to be a design, but really just a way to communicate a rough structure. And what you're really looking at here is simply copy first design. You notice I haven't talked about any pixel perfect or even high fidelity wireframes at this point, and that's because we believe in copy first design. And what that is to say is that content determines design, not the other way around. The content comes first. And that's excellent because as a designer, if you don't have any content, you're kind of just like having to guess what's going to be created, and then you have to jam the copy into that design after it's done. Whereas if you have the copy and content up front, it's really easy to say, okay, this is what they were trying to get across. Naturally, I would create these design elements based off of that. So that was a big piece of this project. And the reason that we enforce this so much is because we had found in previous copy v copy tests, which means all that we're doing is testing one set of copy versus another set of copy, it had increased our conversion rate in the neighborhood of 20%, fairly consistently. So just changing words, we knew was going to lead to a really large impact further down the line in our project. So we wanted to start with the words. Then we began by evaluating design. So saying, okay, what is the general design approach that we want to take? Like, how are we thinking about this at a high level? And I shouldn't say began. This was happening again at the same time that copy was happening. So this is a tough one because aesthetics, they're a tough thing to get right, and they're even more difficult to measure. It's very easy to sort of get caught up in what we subjectively or personally think looks best and say, this is what I think we should do with aesthetics. And so that was like our big challenge when we were evaluating design. However, if we reposition the conversation and our approach to aesthetics a little bit, we can actually get very close to objectively measuring them and taking a really objective approach to aesthetics. And what that is to say is that the best aesthetics are going to account for what the users consider to be beautiful more than what the stakeholders consider to be beautiful. So we're going to change the conversation and say, just in the same way that we're focusing on functionality that's user-centered, we're also going to focus on aesthetics that are user-centered. And this is important because as designers, we can say this is like what I want to get out of the aesthetics, but a lot of the time you'll find out that your user actually wants something completely different, and they may think that your aesthetic direction is totally ugly. And what I love about this is that this is something that we can measure. We can measure user acceptance of aesthetics, and that's exactly what we did here. So a few different things that we did to measure aesthetics, just to give you some examples. We started with illustrations. As I mentioned earlier, we included that in our little MVP. That was like a trendy thing at the time. So we tested illustrations, about 10 different illustrative directions that we created, and then there's like a ton of really well-respected SaaS websites that are using illustrations right now. So we pulled their illustrations and tested them with users. That gave us a lot of interesting insight into what people think of those brands as well. And what we found is that in general, people couldn't agree on illustrations. They don't like illustrations. That was shocking to us because for our team, we were really bought in on illustrations. Like we knew we were going to put illustrations in the design. We were just trying to figure out which illustrations. So each of us had our own favorite illustrative directions and all of this stuff. We were ready to go. And then we put it in front of designers and they're like, actually, we don't really like any of these. We don't like the idea of using illustrations to explain software. We would have cases where users would be looking at illustrations, like for example, we tested Intercom's illustrations. And I always looked up to Intercom's illustrations. I thought that they really led the way with that stuff. I was obsessed with the fact that they used animals because they didn't have to choose a race or a gender or anything. I was like, man, this is just a perfect execution of design and illustration together. And when we tested them with users, some people were like, okay, these are pretty nice. I like this. It adds to the page. But a lot of users, like the overwhelming majority of users, were like, why are they using a giraffe? Like, why isn't it a person telling the story? Why is a giraffe, serving ice cream to somebody? And so you realize, I can make the connection that the reason they did that is so that they can get away from gender and race. And I think that that's genius because I'm a designer, but your average user doesn't give a shit. They just look at the illustration and they're like, oh, okay, this isn't helping tell the story, this isn't adding anything to the page, and they think that it looks childish and all of this other stuff. So we realized, okay, actually it's not a matter of choosing an illustrative direction. Right now we got to take a step back and we're not going to pursue illustrations. That's not to say that those illustrations aren't working well for those other companies. We were dealing with our specific audience. We're probably going to explore stuff like that again in the future, but it didn't work here. And then we did the same thing with drop shadows. So those ugly drop shadows that I put up, it turned out that people also didn't like those. And so we started to get away from from like these really bold, diffuse drop shadows. And this was powerful because these were all a lot of elements that like we were ready to roll with. And it would have just been a bunch of opinion debates, but instead we were able to create aesthetics that really were focused on our users. And we did this a lot. I created an entire Envision board with our new color palette that we were creating and a bunch of inspiration from around the web, other elements that we had like created throughout time. Like seriously, a lot of stuff. And we tested each one of those things to see how people were perceiving those aesthetics within the context of our business. And what we found is that across the board, clean and conservative designs won. And that's a tough thing to swallow. You know, you go on Dribbble, you see like all of this really trendy sort of forward-thinking stuff. Things where, you know, we're breaking up typography into different lines, or we're using crazy gradients and stuff like that. And what we found is that our users actually wanted something that was familiar. Something that looked like a lot of the other stuff that they were seeing so that they could easily understand it, digest it, and navigate through it. So the more clean and conservative designs that we tested, they worked a lot better than the ones that were designed forward. So armed with this information, we moved into the make phase of our project and actually really started pumping out some designs, beginning with wireframes. So if you look back at the set of deliverables that I gave earlier, you would have seen I had like sketches and paper prototypes and all of this stuff on there. Yeah, we blew right past that here because we were like, we don't need any of that stuff for this project. We can immediately move into starting to set the structure of the design. We were confident in our research and in our copy. Again, this is where like the fluidity of that process is really nice. Once we had our structure established, and this usually goes through like several iterations, we really want to get it very close before we start playing with any pixels. We then moved into some mock-ups. Said, okay, based off that wireframe, this is what this could look like. And then for more intense interactions or things that we wanted to explain to an executive stakeholder that you couldn't just like draw on a whiteboard, we created some interactive prototypes. So this is showing an interaction. Other prototypes were like the full site. You know, like we actually basically built the site using images in Envision. And what this netted was over 100 wireframes, over 60 mock-ups, and 4 fully functional prototypes of the site. So we, again, went through several iterations of those 39 pages and their templates before we got to a place where it was really sound. This also impacted our global CSS and like navigation elements and stuff like that. So you can see how typography was changed, some primary and secondary buttons and stuff like that. And then we did some click mapping to see how people, again, were going to interact with the design, some accessibility testing. So here you're looking at a deuteranopia color blindness simulation. I choose to design with color blindness simulator on the majority of the time so that you can see, you know, are we using the right contrast? Does this stuff actually look right? There are other tests that we ran as well for like screen readers and stuff like that. We know that like 19% of the people that use the web are suffering from some form of a disability. So we want to make sure that we're serving that group of our customers as well. And then we tested a bunch of stuff with video and motion. So again, here we've got a pre-launch heat map done using a PNG where the user could click to play a video. So we wanted to see if we included like a video in this product page. Is it something people would want to interact with? Because video is a huge investment to make. So we want to make sure that it's going to add value. It's something that we should be doing. We found a lot of people clicked it. Actually, in this test, like more people clicked it than the CTA. So it was a really popular element. And then the same thing happened post-launch. We changed the design around a little bit. But again, more users are engaging with the video than anything else on the page. And the reason that we did this is because, again, from our research, we learned that 65% of our users preferred to learn about our software through a video. Remember that survey that I showed you all? You're kind of starting to see it manifest itself in the design here. As a result, we found that video product pages with the presence of video converted at a rate that was 300% higher than their counterparts that didn't have videos. So starting with that high-level research and then actually incorporating it into the design led to some real impact here very early on. Then our developers were getting to work as we were creating those wireframes, and they needed to do some pretty crazy stuff. They had to publish 130 pages internationally across 6 different domains. So the 39 pages basically blew up to about 130 when you started to deal with international. And those are the 39 core designs that we were dealing with on the site. And then we pushed the button, launched it from backstage at Inbound 2016. That was a pretty cool moment. Like, as our chief product officer was giving a keynote, we literally flipped the switch and the tweets started coming in, started getting immediate feedback. Nice moment to be part of. And we found, as soon as we flipped that switch, that our CSS assets were reduced in size by 67%. So not only did we create a design that we were pretty happy with, but the code was cleaner than previous iterations that we had run. And so you can kind of see how maybe a little bit of design debt actually is related to tech debt, and there's a close relationship there. And then we didn't stop with our launch. We wanted to understand how it was performing. And this is the piece that a lot of teams tend to forget about. It's like, okay, we launched it at the event. Now we can move on to the next project, especially in sort of like that more waterfall approach that I talked about. But realistically, when we press the button to launch it, that's like we're done with about 25% of the work that we'll do on that major iteration of the site. So there's a lot more that we're doing. And first thing that we wanted to look at was conversion. So we were tracking those 90 plus different conversion flows. What you're looking at here is our huge dashboard that we've built with like all of the main metrics and everything that we care about. This is hybrid data coming from Google Analytics 360, Amplitude, and HubSpot Analytics, all funneled into one huge Google Sheet and compiled using Google BigQuery. So anybody can go and see the health of the site at any point. If it's red, it's bad. If it's green, it's good. You get yourself a little bit of a nice visual there. And this is only the metrics that we care about. There's a ton of other data that we're collecting that's not completely relevant to the work that we're doing, so we wanted to cut out that noise. We doubled the conversion rate of our site with this project. So we're happy about that. A 2 times increase in conversion globally on HubSpot.com. This MQL, Marketing Qualified Lead, or you could say this conversion, this has our highest close rate. So we specifically wanted to increase demos because we know that people are more likely to buy and retain on the product if we increase that. This then led to a 2 times volume increase in our inbound calls. So more people were calling us, and then a 30% increase in sales chat. So more people were chatting with us on the page. We had sort of made that a little bit more prominent, a little more friendly. And again, these are high close rate conversions. What this then netted was a 27% increase in product signups across all HubSpot products. So if you think back to that revenue model that I gave you earlier, and then you just do a little bit of quick calculation here, you can kind of see the neighborhood of the bottom line revenue impact that this single project had. And that was pretty powerful for us. But then we didn't stop there. We continued to iterate. That's not the end of the project. We were running additional tests, iterations based off of like hypotheses and stuff like that that we had set. And we're still doing that today. If you go to the site today, you'll see a design that's fairly different. We've kind of gotten back to that mixture of a bunch of different elements and stuff like that from the one that we had created as a result of this project. So we can start to see how this approach with Lean, the Lean UX process, when you really bring it together in a team, and you take an objective approach to design and you say, we're going to set real goals, we're going to back up the reasoning and thought behind every single design element that we introduce, you can start to see how you not only get better results, but you really can form a little bit of a lean enterprise. Like, it's actually a possible thing to do. But I believe that this is possible to apply at any scale, regardless of how small or large your company is. In fact, a lean process like the one that I described actually suits itself even better to a startup. So I hope that this was useful to everybody here, regardless of whether or not you are part of an enterprise. However, if you want to learn more about that, I did a podcast with Jared Spool and Jeff Gotthelf. Jeff Gotthelf literally wrote the book on Lean UX, like the book titled Lean UX, he wrote that. So we did a podcast you can find at uxd.to/UIE. We talk all about Lean UX in the enterprise and how that's actually applied. If you want to read a study of this project, maybe have a little something to pass along to people, you can go to uxd.to/study. And then finally, HubSpot's information is on the left if you want to learn more about the software that we're building, some of the cool design teams that we have. My information is on the right if you want to watch more rants like this or read some essays, get into my head a little bit, you can go there. And then this link down here popped up several times throughout the talk, uxd.to/lean. If you go to that short link, that will take you to a page that I built specifically for this talk. It's got the slides, it's got a previously recorded video of this talk, so you can pass it along to other people if you think that they would find this useful, and you can also find the study and some other stuff there. Another thing that I want to mention is that this talk is part of something called the UX Balkan Tour. So Anton is somewhere in the back of the room. He organized this entire event. We're going across the Balkans talking about design and things like this. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to uxbalkan.com or follow us at uxbalkan. This is a cool little experiment that we're doing. It's self-funded and independent, so we paid for this ourselves as like a way to give back to the community. And my goal here is to learn from you all and talk to you all about all of this stuff as somebody that's coming from a completely different perspective. So I think we're going to have some time to do that. I'm not going to take like direct questions now just because I took forever to give you this talk. But we're going to do a little bit of a panel, I believe, right?
Yeah, first of all...